Hello and welcome to Move Conversations. This is your host Venkat. In this episode, we talk to Mr. Hans Udeshi. Mr. Udeshi is an independent consultant, but till recently, he was the president of Home and Living at Spar India. And prior to that, he was the CEO of General Merchandise at Future Value Retail, which is better known for most people as Big Bazaar or the Future Group of companies. Right. My co-producer Mrigank and Mr. Udeshi were classmates at the very famous Sriram College of Commerce in New Delhi. Welcome to Move Conversations, Mr. Udeshi.
Thank you, Venkat, for having me.
Thank you very much. Let's begin with the background to the evolution of modern retail. You have so much experience in the retail from a modern retail in India from an early days. So when did it start? Who were the pioneers? How?
So, Venkat, surprisingly, modern retail in India or organized retail in India actually goes back to before the 1900s. So,
Wow.
in 1863, a gentleman called Spencer
Oh yeah, Spencer's
put
from
up
Madras, Chennai.
yes, absolutely, absolutely. So he put up this Spencer's property, and that also, it's morphed over the years into various things, and it still exists in one form or the other
Right.
at this point. So that Spencer's Plaza
Hmm.
was the first sort of modern retail
Modern
format,
retail.
and
Right.
it's that old.
Right.
And after that, there was a Spencer's department store which was opened in 1890 something,
Hmm.
which had some 80 odd departments, and
Hmm.
presumably it served the British and the expats there at that time. I think very few people in retail also know this,
Yeah.
but Indian organized retail is pretty old.
It's pretty old, yeah.
But
Yes,
if
please.
we take modern retail in the sense that most of us understand it, which is post-independence,
Right.
you'll really have to go down to the 1990s at the time of liberalization.
Correct.
So before that, so let's say up to the 1980s, we are all familiar with the way retail was in India when we were growing up.
Right.
People of my generation.
Hmm.
So it consisted of what you could call high streets. So you can say places like in Delhi, Connaught Place and South Extension Market,
That's right.
in Mumbai, Linking Road, in Bangalore, Commercial Street.
Right.
So there were these places where people would collect and shop. There were some brands which were doing smaller stores, but with an international look and feel, so Benettons and so on. There were some garment exporters in India who obviously had been abroad and who understood retailing as it happened abroad and had opened uh, primarily clothing chains, so Weekender, Warehouse, and so on.
Yeah,
Uh,
pantaloons.
Pantaloons, yeah, also. Uh, but the pantaloon stores came a little later in the 90s, so
Oh, okay.
they were not there
Yeah,
in the
color
80s.
plus pantaloons was a little
Correct,
later.
correct.
Hmm.
And then there were what were the malls of those days, which were primarily kind of shopping centers because
Right, right.
they had smaller shops in them. They didn't really have that mall look and feel, which consists of many visual elements and you can say architectural or structural elements,
Sure,
which
sure.
is a topic in itself. So I won't go into that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And there were a number of people who were regionally doing a lot of stuff. So there were the Sarvanas in Chennai who were doing some phenomenal retailing. There was Chermas in Hyderabad. There was
Hmm.
Vishal on the eastern side.
Hmm.
So there was a lot going on. But to my mind, and people may disagree with me, the first really sort of sea change in retail came was when Shoppers Stop opened in Andheri in 1991.
Okay.
Was
Tell us more about that.
yeah, because this was a big store,
True.
air conditioned, lots
Yeah.
of space for people to walk around. They could touch, feel the products. It wasn't the typical place where the person behind the counter served you. Uh, so it was a pretty stunning change, I would say. And I think a testament to that from my experience was I was working with a British chain store and mail order company at that time.
Right.
And we had some executives who had flown into India because they wanted to set up the company stores here.
Mm-hmm.
And they were looking at Russia and India at the same time. And that was a time when, Russia was had just completed
Opened
their
up, yeah.
transition, opened up
Perestroika and all.
Perestroika, Glasnost, all that stuff. So they had gone to Russia first and they saw things there. And obviously they were pretty primitive. And when they came to India, they expected something similar. As luck would have it, when they landed in Mumbai, we had to meet some vendors there. Their luggage was lost by the airline. And so they somehow slept in the hotel at night. And in the morning, they asked their taxi driver, just take us to whatever is the nicest place in town where we can get some new sets of clothes. And fortunately, he was a sensible guy and he took them to this shopper stop.
Shopper stop.
And when they came there, they realized this was not Russia because
Yeah.
they were planning to set up something completely new in India. And they found that at least one store of that completely new already existed.
Already existed. Yeah, I've been to Russia of that time, so
yeah. Okay, so you can understand how it must have been like.
Yeah.
So I think that was the sort of beginning. The second big change that came was in 2001. Big Bazaar, in a space of 30 days, opened 3 stores, all about 30, 40, 50,000 square feet.
Right.
And while hypermarkets in some form had been around, this was an indication of the first national footprint of hypermarkets that came. Because, one was in Hyderabad, one was in Bangalore, one was in Calcutta, and then the fourth one was in Mumbai. And within 6 years, they were at 100 stores. So that was a phenomenal speed for an Indian retailer. And the fact that it was across India. So all this, I will dominate this city or I will dominate this state. That was out of the window at that point. And
so how did they choose those? Sorry, no, I just wanted to, quick follow up because it was very fascinating to hear that they moved from so fast to 100. So just thought that like it may be the place to just get our audience understand this. How were the site or locations selection done in those days for so many cities? What were the criteria?
So I guess, in those days, it was property was a bit of a seller's market because there were only so many developers and so many properties that came on the market.
Right.
But the thought of going to these 3 cities was, one of the reasons was that they were a little bit away from the radar. It was not Mumbai or Delhi where you get noticed immediately. So the idea was to launch a little quietly and then, see if there were any things to be corrected and then do them in the subsequent cities, which is precisely what was done.
So my question was also about the subsequent cities, the next tier cities. So how do they make those selections for both city selection as well as location selection in those cities? I get the developer issue, but could you just say that how would they still?
So while I was not involved in the store selection or the property selection, the idea was largely to get into now major metros. As I said, to iron out the wrinkles and then put a big visible face. That's also the time when food was introduced into these stores. So earlier they were only apparel and general merchandise, and now it was a complete offering. So it became that much more relevant as a concept.
Right. So what were the differences across these various parts of India? Because in a short time or reasonably short period of time, if you grow from from 5 to 50 to 100 or so, what were the notable differences across the cities and the regions, and in terms of retailing practices and so on and so forth?
So I would say some of the differences are probably still valid. I mean, India is a large country with a lot of diversity, so various cities and various regions behave completely differently. They have very different ways of operating. They have a very different history. So if I were to, put it in slightly cliched terms, but cliches are based on some kind of facts. The South tends to be where has tended to be where most retailers have wanted to start. Because it's experimental. It accepts new formats. It's not overly brand conscious, so one can try a lot of new things. The East, on the other hand, tends to be very traditional. What we found, in working there was that this generation used to still stick with the brands of their parents' generation, which still used to stick to the brands of their grandparents' generation. Right. Now, again, I'm saying it's a very broad brush sort of statement, but it sort of indicates the difference between this region and the other regions.
Right.
The North, as you would expect, is highly experimental. They are more sort of generous with their money. They are willing to try new things, spend. I would say the northern, let's say, non-urban regions are a little conservative.
Yeah.
But in the cities, they are extremely aggressive, and it's a good place to, get higher spends.
Right. And the West?
The West, I would say, is two parts. One is Maharashtra, which is kind of because Mumbai is a large part of Maharashtra. It's an expensive place to do business, as is the NCR. But the other part is Gujarat and Rajasthan, if you consider it as West. Extremely conservative, difficult to do business because every person knows the price and the value of everything. So, the Gujarati and the Marwadi, they're tough people to get on your side. So I think those are the broad differences. And I'm saying it's kind of very general, but these things help when you're making decisions.
Right. So, how does this, you keep in mind these and what are the other factors that you keep in mind when you think in terms of SKUs and, merchandising as you start adopting to smaller cities, right? I mean, you did mention that in the bigger cities, when you first entered, there are certain commonalities and, big cityness, the kind of population that you first encounter, whom you cater to when you open a supermarket like that. So there are some similarities. Also talked about South and the North, willingness to experiment and so on, the big cities, right? So then, but then when you have to adjust to smaller cities, do you adjust the SKUs and, do you do your merchandising differently when you go to these smaller cities, East, West, South, North, whatever? You can highlight all the interesting differences and similarities.
So let's put it this way. There used to be a lot of differences. So when I go back maybe 10 or 15 years ago, there was a lot of difference. The smaller cities had not evolved, and they still wanted more traditional sort of products, particularly when it came to across categories, because there was just not enough awareness. So there were many things which you could have put in the larger cities, in the smaller towns, they would not have really understood the use of, and they would have taken a lot of, it's kind of difficult to convince somebody to use something which they don't know how to use.
True, true.
I would say today the differences have largely gone away. There are some differences in terms of, let's say, clothing. So if you're selling to smaller towns, more conservative towns, you possibly could not get away with very short skirts or low necklines and things like that. So one has to take care of those things. But otherwise, fairly standardized. Even apparel, there used to be a very particular look and feel to small town apparel. Which was, let's say, if you have kids, apparel, it'll have lots of patches and sequins and it's kind of changed because it's become more uniform and looks more like what you would see internationally. So slowly those differences are going away. And, one incident I remember very clearly was, which sort of told me that the shift had happened. And this was about, again, maybe 10 years ago.
Okay.
We had one of our regional people had called us and told us that, he was in a small town in Maharashtra. And he said, you guys keep sending us stuff which doesn't sell. And he was referring particularly to the luggage category. He says, you send us all these trolleys which people wheel around at airports and all. They have no meaning over here. We need trunks and suitcases and all that stuff. So, stop sending us this stuff because it doesn't sell. So we said, okay, let's, some of the numbers were not showing too much sales in even the things he was mentioning. And in fact, we had to liquidate some of that stuff. So we were not very convinced about what he was saying. So we went down. We drove down to that city, the whole team, and we said, just take us to some shops that sell luggage and let's understand. So he took us to the market and we looked around, and sure enough, all the shops had trunks and they had the suitcases and all the stuff which we didn't keep because we were a little trying to be a step ahead. But then when we actually got talking to the people who ran those stores, they said, we keep this stuff because we think we should keep it, but the stuff doesn't sell. So I think we felt vindicated that day. And
so what sold was the ones with wheels and all.
Right? Absolutely. So it's just that we weren't selling too much of anything. So it was more of a problem of the store. Maybe
management,
the way we were running it, or the location, or 100 other things. But it wasn't
but not the SKF products, right?
So, sometimes the simplest answer is not the right answer. So you need to dig a little deeper.
So that brings me to an interesting, related thing that, would you recommend, given this kind of experiences you have had, would you recommend decentralization of merchandising across Indian cities, or should it be centralized by a modern retail chain?
Initially when modern retail started, so to speak, and I'm talking about 20 years or 15 years ago, it was very important to decentralize and to give the regions a lot of power because data was not that great. Customer understanding was not that great, and the people on the floor actually had the insights. They were talking to the customers every day, so it was pretty logical, and I think that's the way most retailers did work.
Okay.
I think as time has gone by and the ability to understand data, the kind of data we have, the kind of insights and the depth of understanding we have about customer behavior. And I think online has shown the way in this, that sometimes pure data tells you so many things that you really don't need anything else. So I think gradually, it's people. I mean, we've seen companies move away to a more centralized structure, and I think that will probably continue.
Right.
Again, this is my opinion.
So would you say that these categories can be managed more in a similar way, whether it is big metros or small cities, right?
Yes. Absolutely.
In fact, your some of your examples remind me. Sometime back, a couple of years back, probably, I had interviewed CTO of Flipkart at the time. He's no more with the organization. He's moved on, and this interview was published in one of the Straits Times newspapers here, Singapore newspapers. So he one of the things he pointed out is that so talking about how Flipkart is able to push many of the things that from the city products also into the big city products into so-called next tier cities. And so he said that Venkat, you all are big city boys. You don't understand. He had grown up in Kanpur, if I remember correctly. So he said that we had a Bata store and even we didn't, and then whoever was the retailer for Batas, he kept only certain types of shoes and not many other shoes. It's not that we didn't have the money to buy. There were families who were willing to buy better shoes. We didn't have it, so I used to give money to an uncle who will go and buy. When he goes to a bigger city, he would buy it and things like that. So says what many people didn't understand, that there was a pent up demand for the city things in the next year.
Absolutely.
So you saw, you faced a similar thing. Is that this seems to be?
Yeah, absolutely. And another example that comes to mind is we had again a region which was a little bit out of our radar because it was a smaller region, and so therefore it got less attention. And again, when I went there and asked about what were the products that were required there and what was it that wasn't coming. I was given a list of 4 or 5 things that we should supply, but we weren't. And but when we went to the stores after that, we found that of the 5 things, all 5 were there in all the stores. So it was just that things were not happening because that region was a little bit off the radar. So maybe people were not working at full efficiency, and
right.
Just you were getting information, but data is kind of pure. So when you get people's opinions, you don't know how much is fact and how much is their opinion.
Right. So what are the challenges, given the context setting and the background that you have talked about? What are the challenges that modern retail faces now in India?
Traditionally, there have been 2 or 3 challenges. The first, of course, is which we touched upon, is property. Spaces are good properties are kind of hard to find, and when they are, the price that you have to pay for them is pretty exorbitant. So that is one. So again, I remember in one of the companies I was working for, we had one French gentleman come over to help us with property selection. And he just went around town and he saw a plot he liked and he says, I want to build a store here. And we had to convince him it doesn't work that way. You may want to build it here, but this is not available. We have to go by what is available. It's a bit of a seller's market. So I think that's one problem, because he was quite shocked. He said, I point at this and, you figure out how to get this to me in the next few days, and, we start working on it. So obviously, it's a little more complicated in India. Uh, and also, once you start paying exorbitant prices for properties, it plays havoc on your margins. So,
Right.
especially if you are in a low margin business, like let's say a hypermarket, if the rent knocks off half the difference between your selling price and your cost of goods sold,
Hmm.
then you don't have very much to play with on other factors. So then how do you pay for your employees? How do you pay for your power? How do you pay for all the other costs that have to be paid? And how do you make a profit at the end of the day?
Right.
So that's a big one. The second is talent, trained talent, I would say, because retail as a sort of subject for colleges to teach is a fairly recent thing, and a lot of retailers have tried to set up their own system of training and so on, but it's still not exactly where it should be. So that is one. So I think these are the two, and the third is logistics, because most of the logistics that happens is still fairly primitive. You still are sort of calling up the truck driver and finding out where he is. Fortunately, now they have phones, and you can catch
Some
them
GPS.
and some kind of GPS. RFID is still a little expensive for most kinds of products. So that is, it's improving. And again, I would say online has shown the way, and they are doing a phenomenal job of the way they are handling their logistics. And there's a lot of learning that comes from there. So I think
Right.
these are the two or three big factors.
Finance is not one of them. Is that correct?
Finance is surely one of them. Yes, so I think I missed that one.
मैंने कहा बहुत पैसे पड़े हुए हैं.
No, finance is surely one of them, and given that brick and mortar retailers are not able to get the kind of funding that the online people have been able to get, so it's very relevant. They remain kind of profitable from the beginning. So yeah, sure. So that's a good point.
That's good. Thank you for joining us in yet another episode of Move Conversations. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe to the Move Conversations YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get notifications of new episodes. Thank you very much. Till I see you in the next episode. Thank you very much. Have a great day.